Hey there, thank you for coming back to my channel, and if this is your first time here, welcome. Today I'm bringing to you guys a review of the brand new Play Color Eyes eyeshadow palette in Dusty Cat from Etude House. On top of reviewing the formula as well as swatching all of the shades in this palette, I'll also be doing a little bit of a comparison between the Dusty Cat palette and some other cool tone palettes I have in my collection which I thought looked very similar to it. So let's jump right into the video. The Play Color Eyes eyeshadow palette in Dusty Cat is Etude House's newest eyeshadow palette release. This is also a collaboration between the brand and 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐸, a Korean beauty YouTuber who is also a professional makeup artist. This palette is a 9-pan palette with a cool undertone color story. There are 2 glitter shades, 2 shimmer shades, and 5 matte shades. There are 2 things I highly appreciate about the Dusty Cat palette combination of shades. First, I think there is a very good mix of base, crease, transitional, as well as topper shades in this palette, making it really easy to create a look entirely using just this palette alone. Secondly, I also really like the fact that none of the shades in this palette are too pink or too purpley, even though it is a cool undertone palette. Furthermore, there is also a taupe/grayish tinge in almost every shade of this palette, making this a very appropriate palette for daily use. Talking now about the formulation of the eyeshadows, I would have to say that these are probably some of my favorite formulations so far this year. The eyeshadows have very little fallout, yet they're still highly blendable, and they're soft but pigmented at the same time. The 2 glitter shades in the Dusty Cat palette share the same transparent glitter formulation, and they're both very smooth with no fallout at all. The glitter particles are very fine in both shades, but they're different in the color mixes of the glitter particles. The Cutie Cat shade is the more pinkish shade with the occasional blue and silver particles, whereas the Jelly Cat shade is the more transparent opal glitter shade with some peach reflection. Because of the composition of shades in this Dusty Cat palette, I feel that it is a great everyday palette for a lot of different skin tones, even skin tones that are slightly on the warmer side of undertones. Now that we have gone over some details and also swatched all the shades in the Dusty Cat palette, it's time for us to see how the Dusty Cat palette measures up to some other cool tone palettes with very similar color story. The 3 eyeshadow palettes that I want to compare with the Dusty Cat palette from Etude House are the 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐸 My Fave Mood Eye palette in Moony, the 𝐼𝑃KN Selfie Mood Filter eyeshadow palette in Cool Pressed, and lastly, the Dior Backstage eyeshadow palette in Cool Neutral. Let's first do a side-by-side comparison between the Dusty Cat palette and the Moony palette from 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐸𝐿𝐿𝐿𝐿. As you can see, there are for sure quite a few similarities in the color composition between these 2 palettes. However, I would say that the Dusty Cat palette does a better job of including darks as well as bright shades, whereas most of the shades in the Moony palette are a little bit on the darker side. Next, let's do the comparison between the Dusty Cat palette and the Cool Press palette from 𝐼𝑃KN. Among the 3 palettes that I'm going to be comparing, this 𝐼𝑃KN palette probably has the closest color story to the Dusty Cat palette. However, at the same time, when I swatch these 2 palettes side by side, there is a lot more taupiness in the 𝐼𝑃KN shades compared to the shades in the Dusty Cat palette. And lastly, we have a comparison between the Dusty Cat palette and the Dior Cool Neutral palette. Even in the pan, you can see that the color story of the Dior palette is a lot more purpley and also harsher than the color story of the Dusty Cat palette, and the swatches of all shades in these 2 palettes confirm what I just said. There are a lot more darker shades in the Dior Cool Neutral palette than in the the Dusty Cat palette, and therefore this palette appears a lot harsher when swatched on the skin than the Dusty Cat palette. Despite the difference in the shade depth, the eyeshadows in the Dior Cool Neutral palette and the Dusty Cat palette from Etude House actually have formula which feels super similar to each other. The formulation of the eyeshadows in both of these palettes feels soft to the touch and almost jelly-like, even though they are not jelly eyeshadow. They swatch smoothly and are highly blendable. On the other hand, the formulation of the other two palettes from 𝐃𝐢𝐬𝐜𝐿𝐴 and IPKN respectively have more fallout and are also less blendable than the formulation of the Dusty Cat palette eyeshadows. Let me now summarize what I think of the Dusty Cat palette before we end this video. Do I think that the Dusty Cat palette is going to be the one cool tone palette to rule them all? Not necessarily. In particular, I do not think that the color story which the Dusty Cat palette gives us is anything super unique when it comes to cool tone palette. As you can see from my comparison between the shades in the Dusty Cat palette versus the shades in some other cool tone palettes I currently have. However, I still think that this particular palette is an excellent choice for a couple of reasons. First of all, even though it is a cool tone palette, it does not go too deep or dark into the cool tone range of shades, which makes it a lot more versatile, and even people with a slightly warmer undertone can probably still enjoy and create amazing look with the shades in this palette. Secondly, I like the fact that this palette has soft and daily appropriate shades that have been chosen so that they can mix and match together very well. This means I do not have to think a lot when I use the shades in the Dusty Cat palette, and I know whatever combination I come up with will look good. Third, I think Etude House has done a great job at formulating all of the shadows in this Dusty Cat palette because there is very little fallout, yet at the same time, they are all still very blendable and soft, yet pigmented at the same time. And for those reasons, I highly recommend you check out the Dusty Cat palette from Etude House, and I do not think you're going to regret your purchase if you do decide to pick this palette up. Even if you are not someone who uses or enjoys cool tone shadows in your makeup on the daily, I do think that the addition of such a basic yet high quality cool tone palette, such as this Dusty Cat palette to your collection, can do wonder to your makeup as well as the versatility of your makeup collection. That is everything for today, guys. I hope you have had a good time watching this video and that I have helped you make an informed decision regarding the Dusty Cat palette. Hit the like button if you have enjoyed this video and also consider subscribing to my channel for more content on Korean beauty in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video.